So opening question tonight, which would be something in common, I guess, go back maybe to school years. Did you ever do something wrong in school or in the class where the teacher called you out on it and made you an example in front of maybe the whole class or a group of people? We probably all either done that or we sure saw that and maybe said, I don't want to be called out like that, or, made an example of. In this story, as we introduce Hosea, if you want to be turning, please be turning to the book of Hosea in the Old Testament. The prophet Hosea is going to be made an example of for the entire nation of Israel. Not for something he's done wrong, for something he did that was right. He obeys the command of God, specifically something God told him to do, and he gets made an example for the entire nation, for all of Israel. So I just ask you maybe, think about that a little bit and keep that in mind. Of course, the primary teaching is going to be about God and the nation of Israel and how they have and to what extent they have forsaken him, gone away from him, and different terms and different illustrations as in any of the books of prophecy to describe that, depict that. But for Hosea, remember last week we talked a little bit about the faith of Amos that it would take for him to carry out and take that message and what that would mean for him. Just think maybe in the life of Hosea as he is teaching this message publicly for the nation of Israel to consider these things and their need to repent, what he's dealing with in his private life, if we could say that. It's not very private when it's recorded and everybody can read about it. But what he's going to have to deal with day to day at home in his own family situation as he's taking this message out to the nation of Israel. And I was thinking about that. It struck me, I don't think the word is used anywhere in here, but is this somewhat kind of like a parable? One of the definitions we use for parables, and we usually think of, Jesus taught a number of parables in the Gospels. Yes, and there are a handful, smattering of other parables throughout the Bible. One of the definitions we offer is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning, literally to lay alongside of two things. And I see parts of that in this book and in the life of what God tells Hosea to do, and he does, laid alongside of the greater message, God and Israel is really the meat of the story and what needs to be heard and needs to be understood. So with those things in mind as an introduction, talk a little bit about Hosea. Don't know much about him. We've got this one statement. He was the son of a fellow named Beri. From historical references, possibly some conjecture very commonly suggests he was a native up north in the nation of Israel, probably in the area of Samaria. His name means things like salvation or deliverance or help. Very applicable again here. God is sending the message of deliverance, the help that they needed, even though Israel is going to refuse it, or not listen, not respond. He sent to Israel, to the northern tribes, the 10 tribes that kept the name of Israel during her waning days. And so time frame approximately 750 to 725 BC. And you can line that up, again, go back in history. Chapter 1, verse 1, he sets it. This is the word of the Lord that came to Hosea in the days of, and here's several kings, and he lists off. Kings of Judah, kings of Israel. And so if you kind of match all that up, line that up, as the author of our workbook suggests, it kind of matches up with these years. We haven't looked at this in a while, but just as a reference, which is in the front of the workbook, the paper workbook, this timeline. And I've just picked it up for this study. Hosea, if that's about the years, give or take, somewhere along in there. It's during the time of the divided kingdom at the top. There's Israel and Judah both going. But look at that line about halfway through. 722 or 721 BC is when Israel's going to be carried off into captivity by Assyria. So if these years are fairly accurate for Hosea, it's, he's taught for some years, who knows exactly when he started or ended in there, but it's getting right up to, the time of Israel actually being carried away, destroyed, disappearing as a nation from the face of the earth, from a physical nation. And yet, just keep in mind, although, Judah's the other side of that and going on, you cross that midline, it's going to be, what's that, about 120 years till there's 3 different carryings off. Babylon comes in, carries off a chunk, a few years later carries off another set of them, and then 586 BC, generally regarded as the final carrying off, the end of Judah and its existence as a physical nation. So again, we know very little about the background of this guy, but the time frame in which he did it can be lined up by these kings that are mentioned here. And I think it was Doug asked in the end of class last year. He's got a paragraph there on page 41 in the outline A, number 3. Hosea and Amos seeming to be contemporaries, one younger than the other, but working through this similar time frame. They're sent to Israel, to the northern tribes, whereas, as is borne out on the timeline chart, Isaiah and Micah, contemporaries who during the same time frame were prophesying to Judah, the southern kingdom. So we've tried to make this point all along. God didn't just come along one day to any nation say, wow, you're doing some bad stuff, zap, you're gone today. I mean, we've seen that to Edomites, to some of the other heathen nations he's talked to around about him. And so just hopefully you see the same point by means of a timeline like this. Way back here he's got prophets talking even to Judah, even though it's going to be another 120, 30, 40 years before they are ultimately gone. He is sending messenger after messenger after messenger. Different illustrations, different way to say it, to depict it, but the warning has been given time after time after time to both Israel and Judah as God is dealing with his own people as well as the heathen nations, the ones around about them. All right, a little bit about the book. For some background on this book, I do want to take a few minutes, and he gives us these things towards the bottom of page 41. I want to go back for a few minutes to the book of 2 Kings. And if you're going to be headed that way in a minute, we're going to read out of chapter 17 in particular. So, I know, why would you have these out of chronological order, Nolan? Just because it's Nolan and too excited racing through my notes. Skip that first line for a second. Just kind of look at these others in general conditions that were going on. The author asks us, hey, background, go back and read these 3 or 4 chapters out of 2 Kings, a few chapters out of 2 Chronicles. Here's some kinds of things that are brought out throughout those chapters. One, you've got Israel and Judah, who, right, they're kin. They all came from the same common ancestry background, but now we're in the divided kingdom portion of time. But they're at war against each other from time to time. Going up, one challenging the other, and on one occasion, and the king of Judah says, you don't want to do that. You don't want to come down here. Yeah, I do want to come down there. And they come down, just, get routed and about wiped off the map then. We've got as far back again, just trying to make that point. Although this time frame, we're looking primarily at prophets being sent to Israel because it's so close to the end. The Lord sends Syria against Judah. Now, this isn't the final. This is not when they're going to be carried off. But again, a couple hundred years prior, the Lord He sent prophets to warn them. He sends in at times Syria or other nations to go in and loot them, carry off stuff from the temple, all kinds of things, trying to get their attention. Works a little bit, but doesn't have lasting effect. There also in chapter 15, a couple of different verses Assyria, again, not the final carrying off at 722 or 721, but backing up, Assyria at different times starts to invade Israel. And the first of these occasions, you read there, chapter 15, verse 19, the Israelite king says, "Oh, time out, we don't stand a chance. How much money would it take? We'll just serve you. Don't come fight and whoop us. We'll just kind of be your, do whatever you want." They set the price, and he exacts that money. Remember, we've talked about things were good economically throughout Israel, so the king was able to, it doesn't say whether by force or just kindly asked, but he gathers that money from all the people of the land, pays the Assyrian king, so he goes back home. But then what do you know? That king dies, another king is in charge to follow Assyria. Here they come back again. The second, towards the end of chapter 15, come back another time, and actually more of an invasion kind of thing, invading Israel, weren't interested in a tribute or just paying us taxes anymore, started whooping, taking off some stuff and things and carrying away. So things are not real good behind the scenes. Just trying to get some of this more in our mind as we've seen references from our work where, hey, economically they're rich, they got lots of goods, that's why they were so confident in their, what they thought their own, look what we've accomplished, look who we are, we're ruling, we've got all this money and all this stuff. But behind the scenes, it wasn't always that great. If you got a lot of money, you're going to attract the attention of somebody else, and that's what's happening with the Syrian nation, the Assyrians, whoever else around about them. These kind of things are going on time after time after time. These are just a handful I picked out. If we did time out back to that, can I do that? Oh, look at that work. So in the time of the divided kingdom, the Israel and yellow tribes to the north, Judah, the two tribes to the south, right? If we were to talk about kings in Israel, the 10 tribes, is there one word you could use to describe all 19 of them in succession? Evil. Am I hearing wicked? Yeah. There were none good from the time of the divided kingdom on, right? In Israel, just bad, bad, bad. This guy did bad. He's going to ask us a question at the end of this lesson. Go back and list the ones that, how were they described? Their evil was like one before, but there's a common, not just the one before, go all the way back to Jeroboam, who in the time when the kingdom split, the first king over the 10 tribes was Jeroboam. He was a bad guy. And he set a precedent and set the whole nation on a path that then 18 more kings come after him. They all are evil or wicked. And what the guy asked us to do, go back to these chapters, and you'll find a listing, what I think is about 5 of them, at least that I found. It says, they did wicked, not just like the guy before him, which would kind of, your parent or somebody you saw, but all the way back to that first guy. The sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, is just time after time after time reiterated. How wicked he was. And what his actions, it's not that somebody else couldn't have come along and chose to do right, but they didn't in the tribes of Israel. But now down here on the bottom, right, Judah, which is the 2 tribes. Were all of their kings wicked? No. I mean, a bunch of them were. There's about 19 of them also, and the majority, yes, are wicked also. But interspersed, there'd be, hey, this guy did right. He made reforms. He got rid of a bunch of that stuff that the others had brought in. But if you go back to this, Ahaz. Ahaz is a king of Judah, and the ones that did have some good among them. But the statement that's made about him, 2 Chronicles 28:22, he follows the Israelite kings, what they were like. Remember, they're all wicked, bad, evil, one after another after another. This guy in Judah is going to take his lead or influence from those wicked ones in the nation of Israel up north. And he keeps doing it to do evil And it leads to defeat in battle, and yet what this verse tells us, even after all this evil, they're defeated because of his wickedness. He's going to do even more sins beyond what he's already done. So I hope you did go back or look through some of these chapters, kind of get the picture. Here's just some of the things that are going on as we're now, over here reading, well, God sent these prophets. It just sounds, pretty, yeah, it was very bad. Again, not if you look at their gross national product or the average income or whatever. Those were all excellent. But spiritually speaking, things were bad. Okay, now come with me back to 2 Kings 17, if you will. Here's just kind of a summary, this is my phrase, summary of sins that led to rejection of the prophets. Okay? Just listen to this and kind of get a picture of this as we go back into the minor prophets and continue with our study. 2 Kings 17, are you there? Verse 6, in the 9th year of Hosea, the king of Assyria, took Samaria. He carried Israel away into Assyria, and here's where he places them in their land. Picks them up out of the land of Israel, hauls them off. You're my slaves. You belong to me now. Plants them somewhere else where he can, close to home. He can have control over them. This is the actual captivity of Israel. The 722 or 721, right in that time frame, when Assyria comes in and cleans out Israel. Wow. The prophets are warning, they're warning, this is going to happen. It happened. But look beyond this, and I'm just going to kind of skim through this, reading it pretty quickly. So it was, the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God. Here's why Israel was carried off and wiped out. They had sinned against the Lord, which had brought them out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they feared other gods. As you're going through, in my Bible, I've just what's something wrong they did, something bad. How many underlinings or how many words do you hear or phrases? They sinned against God. They feared other gods. 8, they walked in the statutes of the heathens, the ones that the Lord had cast out before them, right? When he said, these people are so evil, I'm driving them, taking them out of the land of Canaan, going to give it to you, so don't be like them, don't do what they did. Israel moved in there, what did they do? Started doing the things like the heathen that had been there before them. Right? That's the easy, the comfortable thing, what you're already used to, what people are used to in that area. God had said, don't do it. Verse 9, what did they do? They did secretly those things that were not right against the Lord their God. They're building high places in their cities, from the tower of the watchman to the fenced city. What for? Well, they set them up, verse 10, images, in other words, statues or idols and groves in every high hill under every green tree. And this, verse 11, is where they're burning incense in all these high places, as did the heathen whom the Lord carried away before them. They wrought wicked things to provoke the Lord to anger. 12, they served idols, the ones that God had said to them, you shall not do this thing. You remember how God started out in the giving of the 10 Commandments? Before he starts listing, what's the very first thing he said to them? Kind of the preface to it. No other gods. I'm a jealous God. You'll have no other God. Don't make any images. What are we reading? They did one after another of these things he strictly forbade them to do. 13. The Lord testified against Israel and against Judah. That's in these times of the prophets that we're studying throughout this quarter, right? By all the prophets, by all the seers. Remember we talked about that other word, someone that could see by God's means, the Holy Spirit working through them could foresee or see these things coming, saying, turn you from your evil ways, keep my commandments and my statutes according to all the law I command your fathers, which I sent to you by my servants the prophets. Again, they haven't been without warning. God said, I have done this all along, sent prophet after prophet. Verse 14, notwithstanding, they would not hear, they won't listen to God. They hardened their necks. Notice they did the hardening of their necks, like to the neck of their fathers that did not believe in the Lord their God. Why wouldn't you do what he said? Because they don't believe in him anymore, because to them he's kind of been pushed aside with all of these others. Now we've got Baal and Ashtaroth and all, we talked about the gods they had to the planets and different things. That's who they believe in now and are, listening to, so to speak. 15, where are we? Rejected his statutes, rejected his covenant he made with their fathers, rejected his testimonies which he testified against them. They followed vanity, became vain. They went after the heathen round about them. Again, concerning the ones the Lord had charged, don't do like those people. 16, they left all the commandments of the Lord their God, made them molten images, even 2 calves, made a grove. They worshipped all the host of heaven. They served Baal. They caused their sons and daughters to pass through the fire, used divination, enchantments, sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. Therefore, the Lord was very angry with Israel. He removed them out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only. That's kind of the spot we are with the end of Hosea and moving on into the next prophets. 19, also Judah kept not the commandments. I mean, they were separate now, their own country. Prophets have been sent to them with the same kinds of messages. You see what's happening to Israel? They're about to go away. You're following in their steps. King Ahaz is going to make sure they follow in the steps of Israel by importing all that evil that he can down into Judah. And so 20, the Lord rejected all the seed of Israel. He afflicts them. He delivers them to the hand of spoilers. This is going on. People are coming in. Even the Edomites will come in at times and, rob or take stuff and carry it off out of the land. Other nations around them are doing that also, till he cast them out of his sight. 21, he rent Israel from the house of David. They made Jeroboam the son of, here's that guy, Jeroboam the son of Nebat, that they made king. And Jeroboam drave Israel from following the Lord and made them sin a great sin. For the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam, which he did. They departed not from them. And that statement is carried out, as we said. You go back and look in history throughout 1st and 2nd Kings and the Chronicles. All 19 of the kings that served over divided kingdom of Israel, wicked and evil. And that statement is repeated over and over. That this next guy became king, well, he did evil like his father. A handful of them, roughly about a third of them, it said they did evil all the way back to Jeroboam was their, couldn't say mentor, they didn't live what he did, was their hero, was their source, was their I want to be like him. And they would just keep compounding the evils and the wickedness. They did all this, verse 23, until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he said by all his servants the prophets. So was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day. So that's several minutes there, but I felt it was good as a, why are we studying these old, these minor prophets over here? And what really was their connection? Where do they fit in? This about 20 verse right here is a great summary, a great chunk of what they were doing, why God was sending them. And as we said, it wasn't a first time they slipped or, started to get off track. He's sending prophet after prophet after prophet. And there's kind of a listing of wicked things they did in quit listening to God, rejecting his commandments, all the things that we read in there. Any comment on this background or going back kind of to historical books of the Kings and the Chronicles? Man, I'm not asking you to memorize a list of 19 kings and 19 kings, because if you said, Nolan, you go first, we'd be in trouble. I can name off a few. That many. After chance. And some of them were short-lived, but some of them would reign 16, 20, 40 years. Yeah, it's going on and going on. Yes, ma'am. He was an example. There must have been something about him. He's the first guy that our nation picked to lead us, right? Well, yeah, he was something. He was something. Okay. A little bit of overview then as we come back to Hosea, and I realize I'm taking some time, and I knew that as I did it, no, we're not going to get through 4 chapters tonight, but I thought with a lot of this background stuff, we've got 3 more weeks of Hosea, and we'll try and spend more time out of actual passages from this book. But look at this with me, if you will. As we said by our introduction, the question we asked, Hosea is a living analogy, right? The experience of Hosea and his wife, Gomer, is going to parallel that of the Lord Jehovah and Israel. So we're going to intermix some of this as I'm making comments. What was it that God told Hosea to do? Chapter 1. Marry someone, go take a wife of the whoredom. And I like the comments, again, if you had time and studied through in the workbook here. In that parallel with God and Israel, when God first took on Israel in a covenant relationship with them, had Israel committed 1,000 sins and needed to be destroyed? No. Not then, right? He gave them the 10 Commandments. They were good. Out of Egypt, you're my people. And they're, yeah, we'll follow you. We're going to do what's right. We promise. And so he says, it's plausible then, in this relationship of Hosea, and Gomer, that she wasn't already an adulteress or a woman of whoredoms, but she had that tendency, or you might say it's how she'd been raised, living under the influence of idolatry, or a daughter of the times, I think would be ways to describe it. He talks about this on the top of page 42, under verses 2 and 3 there. It reminded me, if you go all the way back, do you remember in Genesis chapter 6, after, first couple of chapters, God's created the world and everything in it, and now there starts to be people, and we've got some lists of, so-and-so having sons and all that, and so the world's being populated. In Genesis chapter 6, the first couple of verses there's a statement that says, the sons of God started looking around, and they began to take whom to be wives? The daughters of men, right? They weren't looking for daughters of God. They're the sons of God, evidently upright and still just and good, trying to serve whatever. But that's not who caught their eye. Godly women, under the influence and raises they started seeing something else and started going outside, taking, that kind of women as their wives. And it doesn't happen in one verse. I will say, years are passing by and generations are happening. But what was the result of that in Genesis 6 out of them starting to look and taking daughters of men instead of godly women? What ends up in Genesis 6, what's the status of all people on the earth? Only evil continually. Every thought by that mixing. So, anyway, the baggage that came with them or associated with them. Okay, good term. Yeah. So, yeah, but just trying to help us understand this point. He's told, you go out and take a woman that has that influence, that's been raised like that, or that kind of thinking. Doesn't mean she was on the day they got married or before they got married, but God knowing, how things go or would go, that's, what's going to come down the road for him. And, man, I'm glad he put this in here. Do you see at the top of page 42, the end of that first big paragraph, he's got a reference to Romans chapter 4. I mentioned this a few weeks ago, and at that time I couldn't remember where the verse was, and he puts it in here. The reference to Romans 4, verse 17. Last sentence of that paragraph. Therefore she would be called a wife of whoredom even before she became a harlot. In other words, God speaking. And I threw this out there, the prophetic perfect tense. God can say something in a statement as if it's already true or even past tense before it happens, right? Romans 4:17, as it is written, I have made thee a father of many nations, before him whom believed, even God, who quickeneth the dead, and calleth those things which be not as though they were. God can speak of the future as past tense, is just the point he's trying to remind us of here in the workbook in understanding this. And I remember as a kid, reading through this, and man, that God would tell somebody to go marry an adulteress. No, she wasn't already or at that point, but she's been raised under the influence, where he says it's plausible, at least, to believe. They get married, and some time passes, they start having child, and then at some point down the road, she gives in or is overcome by those influences, and she does then, act as an adulteress and is unfaithful to him, and the story is going to continue. But again, that's the parallel, what Israel's doing to God over time or in time, that you've done all these things against me, right? The nation is sunk to its depths, morally speaking. Again, a lot of money in the bank. They're building palaces and those ivory, places and soft couches and all that we read about under Amos, during this same time frame. And yet, divine grace, if they would repent. Again, you can go through any of these books, kind of the things that are borne out in Hosea, if you were to go through all the chapters and, well, what were they doing wrong? I mean, we read about in 2 Kings 17, he described it in that sense. Some more specific things, gross immoralities, not just that they're overlooking or allowing, they are partaking of. That was the actions they were doing. Polluted worship, oppression, murder, lying, stealing, or tolerated and or done themselves. Rebellion versus authority. That's not just against God, although certainly applies. Them rebelling, we just read in 2 Kings 7, didn't listen to his word anymore, rejected his commandments. But if you get over Hosea, I think it's chapter 7, about the first 7-8 verses, talks about assassinations of physical authorities, within their own nation. So we don't need authority, don't need to listen to anybody else. Does any of this sound familiar? Things going on in the world maybe today? They rely on foreign powers rather than Jehovah. That's another reason I wanted to go back over there in the Kings and Chronicles and read about there. Oh, somebody's coming, to whoop up on us. Can we pay them off? Or somebody's attacking us over here. Let's take some money and go pay this nation. Will you protect us and take care of us? Sometimes, if you pay enough money, yeah, they would step in and protect you. We'll take care as long as you keep paying this tax money. And then what happens? They end up, the first place they're going to take it, or one of the first places, they're going to go to the temple, and all this gold and silver, whatever's of value in there. How could they give that away so easily? Because God didn't mean anything to them during this time frame, right? So there's this beautiful building over there with all this fancy, ornate stuff in it. Send that to the king of Assyria or whoever we needed. So Hosea's summary, of all this stuff is the word, the whoredoms, the adultery, the not being faithful to your partner. That's what Israel was not doing to God. And it's just time after time he makes references to these other idols, these, your lovers that you're chasing after. The impending doom of Israel, man, there in chapter 1, it doesn't take long to say that the Lord's, this is talking about, his first son being born, Jezreel, or scattered of God. For yet a little while I'll avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu, will cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel. I mean, just right off the bat in Hosea's message, the end is here. And God's about to bring it to an end. And yet, Hosea is known as the prophet of love. If you look at a number of commentaries or, folks writing about him, not just because of the love he had for his wife, that he keeps trying and bringing her back in spite of what she's done, but in the greater picture, because there are numerous references throughout the book. What do we have? 14 chapters here. So as you're reading, look for these. It talks about God's love for Israel, His loving kindness. Even though He said from the beginning, I'm about to bring it to an end, He's still a God that loves them. He's willing to keep His part of the covenant if they will repent and come back to Him. Any thoughts? We've got this introduction getting started in the book. Joe? Mm-hmm. Doesn't have them already, right? All right. I think it's, yeah, they did not already have the children together. I would just, if that's an accurate description for her, I would say is a similar description. I assume again by her, the children are going to be raised with that influence towards idolatry, towards rejecting God, toward, all this mess that went with it. That he's going to have problems within his family, not just with his wife, but the children likewise would have those influences. Come down the road. Okay. Thank you. Get me straight. I'm starting to track. Thank you. Yeah. Rough story. And somebody, I'd rather not be talking about, whoredom, adultery, these kinds of things. But that's how God lays it out with this particular prophet. Something bad's going to happen to you. You take this woman, things good at the first, down the road, it's going to be ugly. But then Hosea can, maybe with more meaning, more understanding, take this message to all of Israel. You had a great start. One of the things he's going to bring up, I know the bell rang. Let me close with this. One of the things, I just call it, they forgot who fed them. Again, go through, there's a number of verses where he talks about the wine, the corn, the oil, the barley, the wheat, all these things. He said, man, you're taking all this stuff and you're offering it to your idols, Baal or whatever it might be, these other idols, because that's your lovers, that's who you think's taking care of you. God says, I'm the one that provided those things for you. I brought you out of Egypt, gave you this land, Canaan, the land flowing with milk and honey. I gave you the corn and the wheat and the oil and the barley and all this stuff that you're offering as sacrifice to somebody else. So just another depiction of them forgetting God, rejecting Him, serving these other gods. All right, thank you. I will intend to spend more time out of the the verses and the chapters of the book, Lord willing, next week and beyond, as we continue studying Hosea.